both candidates did say clearly that they will accept the results of the 2022 election. The second and last debate between Ryan and Vance is set for Monday in Youngstown. As we've said, this show was supposed to be an interview with Republican incumbent Governor Mike DeWine, but since there was a scheduling conflict and he's not able to join us, I now have the opportunity to talk to the Statehouse News Bureau team, Andy Chow and Joe Ingles, about not only the election, but some other things. So thank you both for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
So early voting started this week. The Secretary of State's office reports that absentee ballot applications received to date reflect a 4.4% increase over the previous gubernatorial statewide election year in 2018. Let me ask you both, are you getting the sense that there is a lot more interest in this year's election? Any idea why or why not? Andy, let's start with you.
I think it's just kind of hard to tell because we haven't had things like debates, because it's been such a low-key campaign season, as we've seen with things like Governor DeWine refusing to talk to the media, refusing to do debates, really refusing to go out on the campaign trail and hold a traditional campaign. It's hard to really hear from voters when there aren't events going on out there from the Republican side. But at least from the Democratic side, when you go to Nan Whaley events and hear from her and her campaign, it does seem like there are a lot of people who are activated and motivated to get out there and vote. And I think when we do look at early voting statistics, it does seem to be maybe Democrats who sometimes might be the very first ones to request a ballot. So maybe that's a reflection of that as well.
Joe?
Well, I talked with the League of Women Voters director, Jen Miller, and she told me, she said that there has been an uptick in interest over the summer months in people who want to go vote, and they're registering to vote. Now, as you mentioned, it was 4%. 4%. So 4%, you figure that's not a tremendous amount of voters. So, it doesn't mean anything in the scheme of things. But if there's a close race, it could mean a lot. So why those voters are coming out, what they're interested in, we don't know, but it seems like it's been the past couple months, 3 months that's happened.
And indeed, these even year elections that are not presidential elections, the turnout is much less than during presidential election years. But this is interesting to see. I think, Andy, your point is right on about Democrats tend to request the early ballots, get out there first. They have a huge hill to climb in terms of 475,000 more people voted for Donald Trump in Ohio than voted for Joe Biden in 2020. So there's a lot of support for Republican candidates, at least there was in 2020. And the last couple of election cycles for the statewide races, Republicans have won. But let me ask you, Andy brought this up, Joe, the idea of a lack of debate, specifically in the governor's race. Why is this such a big deal? Is it only a big deal to us?
Well, that's a big question. I wonder if it is a big deal to voters, because right now we're not hearing a lot of voters who are sounding off about it. We're hearing a lot of partisan folks who are not happy, or they are happy and think there's no reason to debate. But voters themselves are not sounding off in large numbers. And so maybe it isn't a big deal to voters. But I'll tell you, it should matter. Because if you have a debate, that is a time when questions can be asked about things that are not scripted, and where candidates have to speak their mind and be put on the line with issues that they might not want to address. For example, if there was a debate with Governor DeWine, some of the things that could be putting him on the hot seat would be his involvement with HB 6, a bill he signed into law. He worked with the principals, his people at least worked, we know from court documents, worked with the principals involved in that law, signed it into law. We find out that there's problems, there's a scandal, there's FBI, charges brought against the former Speaker of the House, the former Republican Party head, all this. So there is a tie between Governor DeWine and that legislation. That would come out in a debate. Another thing that would come out possibly in a debate is his stance on abortion. He'd have to drill down exactly where he stands on that. Now, he's told Right to Life groups that he'd go as far as he could to outlaw abortion, but what exactly does that mean? I'd like to know, and I don't know. I assume voters might want to know. And then what about his gun reform plan? That could come up in a debate if there was one. And, he basically had a 17-point gun reform plan that Ohio lawmakers, the majority of whom are in his own party, they would not embrace it, they would not pass it, but they did pass measures that made guns more accessible, and Governor DeWine signed those into law. So I think those are three things, for example, that would come up in a debate that he doesn't have to talk about if he doesn't have a debate.
I think there's also a polarization issue here too, where if you just let your campaign just spout out 30-second ads or messages on Twitter, but you don't actually meet the other candidate face to face, shake hands, and have a thoughtful conversation about something, then how do you then, whoever wins this election, go on to represent all of Ohio and not just the people who voted for them? It just becomes more of a polarizing climate if you don't even meet and try to present your views to the whole state in one event.
We're still hoping to have him on this show to ask him some of those questions there. Andy, I want to ask you about a forum that was supposed to happen between the two candidates for Chief Justice, who are Democratic Justice Jennifer Brunner and Republican Justice Sharon Kennedy. That looked like it was going to happen, then it got called off. That could have been a really important moment, because while judicial candidates can't really talk about cases that are going to come before them, like candidates for other offices can talk about issues that they're concerned about, the three Republicans who are all on that ballot, Sharon Kennedy, Pat DeWine, and Pat Fisher, have all filled out candidate surveys in which they state that they believe that life begins at fertilization, which is a big deal when you talk about the abortion ban that could be coming before them in a matter of months or maybe even a year.
And here's why that Chief Justice Forum could have been so interesting, is that yes, you do have candidates who of course have their personal opinions on certain issues like abortion, but then the questions that could have come out of that forum could have been, okay, how do you go about being a justice? How do you go about in the judicial process addressing these issues? If you have certain elements that come up, if you have certain challenges to a law based on its constitutionality, how do you as a justice approach those issues? Even if you have your personal views on one side, how do you approach that? And it's not just abortion, it was things on home rule, it was things on bail, things on being partisan from the bench. There are all sorts of issues that could have been taken care of. And again, I think the Chief Justice Forum is especially interesting because they're not necessarily supposed to talk about their personal views. They're supposed to talk about how they would approach this. And there's so many different issues that are coming down the pipeline about to reach the Ohio Supreme Court that they could have talked about.
And we've done forums like this. The Ohio Debate Commission sponsored a forum in 2020 that I anchored with Curtis Jackson from Spectrum News, where we had the four candidates talking about exactly these kinds of wide-ranging concepts rather than specific issues that the candidates might face as justices on the court. But Andy, let me ask you too about, you spent a day on the campaign trail with each of the candidates for U.S. Senate, first Tim Ryan and then J.D. Vance. What did you learn from those 2 days when you were out campaigning, watching them campaign?
Well, they definitely have different approaches. So first with Tim Ryan, I was able to follow him along the campaign trail. First, he started in Toledo, then went to Lima, then ended in Dayton. And it was a very interesting sort of diverse mix of regions where, sure, Toledo tends to vote Democratic, but when you're in Lima, that's a pretty red area, a pretty conservative area for the most part. And then he ended up in Dayton to talk to a group of black voters. And so there was sort of this diverse approach to the topics that he was talking about. He talked about issues that affect black voters. He talked about urban gardening. He talked about different community issues where communities would run into red tape when it comes to federal law. And then he talked about substance use abuse and the opioid crisis. And from that standpoint, there were sort of like smaller pools of people along the way, but several stops. When I followed J.D. Vance, it was much more of a, here's a big stop with a lot of people in one place to be kind of more of a pep rally situation. And what I was really interested to find out with J.D. Vance is that he was sort of treated like a celebrity. I think sometimes we forget, because this campaign has been going on so long, that he is the author of a best-selling book. There are a lot of people in Ohio who really like that book.
It became a movie.
It became a movie with Glenn Close, and people would take their books and get it signed. So he has sort of the celebrity status that I think was a pull for people. And so when you talk to people about the issues, they really seem to be gravitating towards each of their personalities. Tim Ryan's personality, J.D. Vance's personality. I think the special side note with the J.D. Vance side of things is that when I was at a rally that was featuring former President Donald Trump, when I talked to people about why they supported J.D. Vance, they weren't necessarily saying, I'm here because I love J.D. Vance. They were saying, I'm here because I am a big supporter of the former president. And if the former president endorses J.D. Vance than I do too. So there's sort of that caveat to that situation.
Well, because we've spent so much time on our conversations with the candidate series, we haven't been able to talk about some of the other issues that have been happening in the state, but we've all been covering those. And I want to talk about an announcement this week from Honda that you both were covering, a $3.5 billion plan to make batteries for electric vehicles in Fayette County and $700 million to retool 3 existing Honda manufacturing plants. When the announcement of the plant was made, though, there was very little information about what the state has in terms of the stake that it's offered up to Honda. So, Andy, I want to ask you, what do we know about what Ohio is offering to Honda to get this plant and to help with the retooling of these facilities?
So what we've learned now after the announcement was made is that the state plans to give Honda, or to authorize Honda, a $71 million job creation tax credit for the plant based on this new battery plant and based on this new EV hub that they want to create. And I think what was interesting is when the announcement was coming out, we were all able to ask these Honda officials to say, okay, what is in it for Honda? What is the state doing? And they say, oh, we're still in negotiations. We're still talking about that. But if you're going to make this big announcement, you probably have something coming. And of course, a day later, they announced that the state wants to do this job tax credit. The other thing that the state is planning on doing is working with the legislature to pass an $85 million infrastructure upgrade for water, sewer, and transportation.
And Joe, you are from Fayette County, so this story really does hit home in a big way for you. You're working on a story about that for a later show, but what are your preliminary impressions from people that you've talked to about this project?
This is no doubt big news for Fayette County. If you were from there like I was in the 70s, they had much more industrial base, they had jobs. You go downtown and there would be all kinds of shops and restaurants, and it would be, bustling. There just seemed to be more happening, and in recent years you've seen some of these big employers pull out of there, and it's really hurt the community. So getting these jobs that Honda will bring, which will be good paying jobs with benefits, these are life-changing opportunities for local folks down there. Not only that, Fayette County is somewhere that has been underestimated for a very long time, and I'm not saying that because I'm biased to Fayette County, but maybe I am a little bit. But if you look at Fayette County, it pulls from Dayton, it can pull from Columbus, it can pull from Cincinnati. So if someone wants to take a job at Honda in Fayette County, they don't necessarily have to move to Jeffersonville or Washington Courthouse or somewhere like that. They could live in a southern part of Columbus, in a part of a city where they could get to it quicker. And I think that's in the back of the minds of the Honda folks, because when they were talking about proximity and where they were going to get their workforce, they brought that up.